Hey Doug, this is Don. Hey, sorry I'm so late with this. Trying to head off to a couple days of PTO for my engagement, not my engagement, my anniversary with my wife. So, but I'm glad to answer questions because I know you guys are trying to get this over the line. I am too because, as I said, I got some other things I'm considering. So I'm trying to accommodate you guys, but I don't want to pass on something else. So here's what I did. I took the presentation and didn't change anything here, but I broke down the elements just so that you can understand it a little bit more deeply. But Doug, I wanted to say we exchanged a note the other day about the resources. You answered me relative to the resources on the project, but that's not what I'm talking about. What we've put into consideration here is that as the system gets built, part of this is helping you guys arms and legs wise with that piece and the technical elements around that and the business elements like how to inform TCI better, how to get better business drivers. That needs to be put in. But what I was talking about more so is when you consider somebody like PPMC, they don't have anybody that has anything to do with any of these systems. Most of their business on the, especially the pet side, but even Maxi is supported by a wide broker network. They're going to need to be trained on the system. Brokers typically know these systems a little bit better, but again, they're all going to have to be trained. So it's more kind of plugging back into what we did on the org design work and updating that. So things like Harry's group has no manpower to handle ROI at a robust level. Kyle's group doesn't have the ability at this point to handle that stuff. So we're going to have to map some of that stuff out. In food service, the TPM group in the controller area was entering all the promos into the system. We don't think that's a best practice. So that's the kind of stuff that we would dig into that would be non-system blueprinting of processes that when we would turn into other things. Okay, so I hope that's clear, but that's why this is probably a little bit more sizable than you guys might have talked about. This one's pretty straightforward. The vendor selection phase, I'm involved in that. We know what's going on. I'd love to get my guys around that because I'd love to have a few more of us involved in actually scoring these vendors. We're familiar. I've seen Salesforce. I'm active with it at a couple of clients right now. But it's a pretty new piece of software, relatively speaking, the interface. I'm getting a demo on it from them here pretty quickly. SAP is always changing, and there's a new version of that coming in. And then TELUS, we know them pretty well. We know what to expect there, but it would be good to get my guys with me on this so we make sure we have full coverage against it with you, and they get indoctrinated into your business. Okay, but $49K for this. This is the first one that involves a range because this is the blueprinting phase. So what I wanted to give you a little bit more depth around is this is an example of some blueprinting that we did with a client. So we're going to get much deeper in this next section, and I vetted this with PwC, but it starts to look like this. We go through the system and we build a configuration document. And just down here, this is one that I did recently with the guys. We did Abbott. We had over 150 pages, almost 250 pages of each of these documents. So you can see there's one for 8 pages, there's one for 26, there's one for 17, but it's every module in the system. We lay down the choices that we've made in the system. And this is key because you'll see in a minute, this is what we utilize to build the test scripts that we use to test the interface. In other words, if this document is what we want the system to be, the testing is to test that we got what's in this document and that it's working the way we want it to work. Okay, so that's a big chunk of this. And then we have other things, Doug, like when we did the total customer investment with you guys, all the work I did, a year and a half worth of work with Carolyn and the team to just map out what you guys had. And we discovered that it was a mess and we have to fix that. So all the elements that would be in the system as far as what are the drop downs, how are we going to use P&Ls, things like digital spends, which aren't in the current system. We're going to need performance types for those. So all the things that we couldn't fix in SAP CRM, we're going to want to do here. And that's a bunch of work that goes beyond just regular blueprinting. Okay, and so you have a range of 250 to 350. The low end of all these ranges assumes that we would need one piece of work for this on foods and one piece of work for this on food service. The high end of the range starts to bring in things that we would have to do to accommodate nuances or, like working with brokers or new FTEs like Jake's team. He's the sales guy in PPMC. He's got an RGM team. They know nothing about any of this stuff. So what practices or nuances for deal types or things are they going to need to have in the system in order to accommodate their way of working? Okay, it could be on the same platform, but there might be a version of it that is configured slightly differently for their business. Okay, so that's, to the extent that happens, that's where we would go to the high end of the range. Okay, And then so that was the system blueprinting. This is now more process and people blueprinting. So it has two big pieces. One, there's a whole bunch of policies that you guys don't have, and I have examples of them here. Andy and John, especially Andy's an expert at this, and we've drafted a lot of these. And there's some examples more in the back of this presentation. But we would work on the business with unearthing those, and then as I talked about, we would go back into the people side of the equation for things like, okay, now that we're going to have baseline in the system, and we're going to map out how the numbers work, we got to map out how the people work with the numbers on all of these processes. So some of these you have, but you don't do them as deeply as you need to. Some of them you don't do, like auditing. Monthly compliance, Harry does this, but he doesn't have all the numbers that he needs. So that would be kind of updating that one. But this is primarily what John and Andy and I would work on, is doubling back on some of that work that we did and updating it to reflect your new capabilities, okay? And so again, low end of the range is doing it for food service and foods only, such that all the other businesses would draft off of it on the PPMC side, for example. Or if we need to nuance it for those guys, and again, like think about Jake's organization, I think about Penny's organization, Cal Coven's organization, where they don't even have an FP&A group. So this would create a whole stream of liability reconciliation that those guys would have to use the system to do. Okay, so that's where we would do that work. Then you get into the build and the integration phase. There's kind of a multi-tier of work here. So this is where we would take those configuration documents that I showed you, and we would build scripts to test the system. Most cases, we're building the scripts and managing the teams to test. We've built in the likelihood that we're going to have to augment Perdue resources to help test the system. So we would both build that and jump in on some of the testing with you guys as PwC is building the SAP interfaces and doing system integration testing on their side. Okay, and then on the people side of the equation, we would deliver. Oh, I'm sorry, this is still system stuff, Doug. Sorry. We would then use the UAT testing and our knowledge there to build out really deep training modules. You didn't have this for SAP CRM. There were some PowerPoints that were done in 2014, and then Savage came back and did some Word document-based instructions that were good. There was nothing wrong with them, but I'm sure they took a heroic effort on his part. We would create these in really high-quality, visually appealing templates, and we'd have one for each of the work modules in the system. And then we also after we're done with the training, we go back and we then do a walkthrough of some of the key work instructions and build videos against them. And these videos are editable over time. And you guys just bought a learning management system, so Allison could put these up there and you guys could have these moving forward. And then this outlines the number of trainings that we would expect to do. Again, the high side of the range accounts for the nuances that would have to be done in order to accommodate those trailing businesses, if you will. Okay. And then last but not least, we would take the processes. Now we're back to the functional side of the equation. We would take all those processes that Andy, John, and I had updated, and we would update, or in some cases, we're probably going to have to create jobs. And then we would update the competencies to reflect the new skills that would be needed in those roles and by people in current roles. And then we would train the new work skills. And this is where a lot of companies fall short. You have all this technical training of how to work on the system, but then people get the system and they don't know what to do with it to help make money in their day-to-day jobs. I would argue that if you're going to get the value, it's more going to be because of this than because you got a new system. New systems don't create value. People create value with the systems. Okay, so when you roll that all up, here's the folks that would work on it. I totaled the high end and the low end of the ranges for you, and here's the number I got to. Okay, hopefully that helps. All the backup and visuals, and there's a lot here, but there's a lot of work. So I put it in there so you could get a sense visually of what we would be doing, but hopefully that helps you understand why the number is what it is. Okay, thanks, Doug.